Hello and welcome to another edition of Naked Truth. In this episode, we are going to deal with Apostle Paul. If you ask many Christians, or most of them, who founded Christianity, they will tell you, of course, it was Jesus and the apostles of Jesus. But that would not be accurate, because Jesus himself would not be a Christian, as I pointed out in my previous videos. The apostles as well would not also be Christians, as I pointed out. Now, that means that the Christianity we know today is a product not of Jesus, but a product of somebody else. And that somebody else is Paul and the Roman Church. So we will start today with the conversion of Paul and see whether it was factual or fictional. Stay tuned. There are three accounts of the conversion of Paul in the New Testament. Two of them were written by the same person in the Acts of the Apostles, and one of them was written by Paul himself. We shall compare these two accounts to see whether they are the same or whether they are different, and if they are different, what the implications will be to this story. Now, the first conversion story was in Acts 9, 1 to 30. Acts 9, 1 to 30. In that account, written by the same person that wrote the Gospel of Luke, whose name we do not actually know, but the same person wrote both of them. And this person wasn't a disciple of Jesus, neither was he an apostle or follower, but he was just somebody unknown but presumed to be Luke. So in this account, Paul was on his way to Damascus with a letter from the high priest or the chief priest to go and arrest Christians in Damascus and bring them bound in chains to Jerusalem for prosecution and punishment. As he was on his way to Damascus with some companions, suddenly there was a supernatural event. There was a flash in light, brighter than the sun, it says, which struck Paul and his companions, and they fell to the ground, and Paul became blind. Then a voice, or the voice of Jesus, according to the story, was heard clearly telling Paul, "Why are you persecuting me?" And he now said that Paul should go to Damascus and meet one Ananias, one of the leaders of the believers in that place, and get instructions from him on what to do. Then Ananias himself, we are told, had a vision in which he was instructed by Jesus that Paul was coming, that Paul, he was going to heal Paul, restore his sight, and instruct him on what to do, because Paul has been chosen as an instrument to proclaim the name of Jesus to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. So Paul was led to Damascus. Remember, he was still blind from the encounter, and he spent several days in Damascus with the believers. He preached the gospel there, But before then, his sight had been restored by Ananias, and he had been baptized by Ananias. After several days in Damascus, Paul went to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, he spent a lot of time there, going about with other disciples and believers and preaching the gospel of Jesus. However, there was a plot to kill him. In fact, there was a plot to kill him in Damascus, and there was a plot to kill him in Jerusalem. And following this plot, the disciples of Jesus smuggled him out of town on the way to Tarsus, where he began his ministry to the Gentiles. So Paul was healed by Ananias. He went with the disciples in Jerusalem preaching. He spent time in Damascus preaching. So basically, despite initial skepticisms, the believers accepted him in their fold. And his ministry was directed in a way by the disciples. So, in the Acts story, the conversion of Paul was a public event, and his ministry became possible through the agency and help of the disciples of Jesus in Jerusalem and in Damascus, who instructed him on what to do. Now, if you go to Acts 22, verses 5 to 21, and Acts 26, 9 to 32, you will see other accounts of this story. But they all link together, despite minor differences to the one in Acts 9. So this is the story of the conversion in Acts of the Apostles. What about the story of conversion in Galatians? The one told by Paul himself. Now let's go to Galatians 1 from verses 11 to 22. This was a place, or the place where Paul gave an account by his own words, in his own mouth, of the conversion. He said that he did not receive, neither was he taught the gospel by any man or anybody. He said he received the gospel entirely through revelation by Jesus Christ. He said the Son of God was revealed to him so that he would preach him among the Gentiles. So this revelation, Paul did not say how it happened, when it happened, where it happened, but to all intents and purposes, it was private. There was no flashing light. There was no voice of Jesus from heaven telling him, "Why are you persecuting me?" Paul wasn't blind and wasn't led anywhere by anybody. It was an entirely private affair. And Paul said that after his revelation, his immediate response was, quote, not to consult any human being. He said, quote, he did not go up to Jerusalem to see those that were apostles before him. Instead, he went straight, immediately to Arabia. In this account, by Paul himself, he wasn't taken to Damascus. He did not go to Damascus to consult Ananias or for briefing. He did not meet any Christians in Damascus. He did not preach in Damascus. There was no mention of any baptism by Ananias or any healing by Ananias. There was no blindness, of course, and therefore nothing to heal. There was no vision by Ananias that Paul was an instrument of the gospel, both to Gentiles and to the Israelites. Paul continues that 3 years after his revelation, after the incident, he then went to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter, and then he stayed with him for 15 days only. He said he did not meet any other disciple or apostle of Jesus except James, the brother of Jesus. He said he was not known personally to the churches of Christ in Judea. They didn't meet him, he didn't meet them, he didn't preach with them, they didn't discuss with them. They didn't know him. They only heard, Paul says, quote, "The man who formerly persecuted us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy." End of quote. And then Paul said he went to Syria. So he spent after 3 years of the incident of his revelation, he now went to Jerusalem 3 years after. So he's been walking and preaching to Gentiles, and then 3 years later came to Jerusalem, spent 15 days, saw only Peter and James, nobody else. So there was no preaching in Jerusalem. There was no plot to kill Paul. He wasn't smuggled out of town by the disciples in Jerusalem. His mission to Gentiles was planned from the very beginning. He was given this order, according to him, by Jesus in that revelation. He did not need anyone to tell him that. And there was no change of plan because of any plot to kill him. So in his own account, Paul was totally independent of the Jerusalem Christians, of the Christians in Judea, and he did his own thing. He received orders only from heaven and not from any human being. His conversion was a totally private affair. Now, which of these accounts came first and which one is to be believed? Well, the Paul's letter to the Galatians, and indeed all his letters, were written before the Gospels. Galatians was among the first epistles of Paul. It was written around the year 49 to 58. It wasn't starting, but the range agreed by scholars was it could not have been earlier than 49. Now, it was written decades before the Acts of the Apostles was written. And the Acts of the Apostles was written around or between 79 or 70 to 90 years, 70 to 90. So at least 20-something years, 20 to 30 years after the Galatian story had been written. Which means the Galatian story is superior, not only because it was supposed to be a direct account, a first-hand account of Paul himself. It was also written way before the account in the Acts of Apostles. So these discrepancies in the story of conversion, of course, cast a lot of doubt on the truthfulness or veracity of the story in the first place. And it is clear that since the Galatian story was written first by the man Paul himself, whose mission you will see in subsequent videos was totally different from the mission of the disciples of Jesus and of Jesus himself. So the Acts story appears to be an attempt to embellish or reconstruct the Galatian story of Paul in order to bring it together in line with the story of the gospel and the story of other disciples. In any event, it is doubtful that Paul could have gone to Damascus to arrest people and bring them to Jerusalem. Do not forget that Damascus was in Syria. It was a different country, a different territory. And Paul came from Israel, from Jerusalem. Could he go to Damascus and arrest people and take them to Jerusalem without authority given by the governor or the rulers of the empire, either from Rome or from Damascus or anywhere else? So it is very doubtful that he could actually go to Damascus to arrest anyone. But that's another matter for discussion. But the point is that the story of the conversion of Paul, which is the foundation of his claim to apostleship, is very, very doubtful. Thank you for watching. The discussion continues in the next video, where we shall discuss the question of the ministry of Paul.